Hey folks, and welcome back. Joshua here. Today I'm going to talk about what I call the 5 pillars of health. It's unfortunate that I see so many people in this life struggling to get by. The way I put it is that people are stuck in survival mode. My goal is to help people get past the survival mode and into a place of thriving. What that requires is that we have a balanced emphasis in all the areas of our healthy life. So what I want to do with each category that I talk about, I want to talk about it from the angle of deficiency and excess, and talk about what we can do to get back to a balanced perspective so that we can get to that place of thriving, which we're all looking forward to. The first pillar of health is physical. A balanced physical lifestyle looks like one that takes care of bodily needs. So as I said, I'm going to talk about this from a deficient and an excessive angle. A deficient physical lifestyle looks basically like ignoring the body. Countless people I meet in my professional life don't pay attention to the basic needs of food and shelter and hunger and sleep and sex and whatever else the body tells it that it needs. A deficient physical life keeps you from paying attention to what the body needs and then actualizing that in basic standard daily behaviors. The excessive lifestyle for physical health comes in the form of overemphasis on the body. Now this one might sound familiar. We live in a society in which we do overemphasize the body. The problem is that we overemphasize how the body looks rather than how the body feels. So an overemphasis on the body can actually look like overeating or overworking out. The excess comes in the form of believing that that extra amount of whatever, food or exercise or whatever it might be, gets you what you want. Either the pleasure that you want or the body that you want. A balanced lifestyle in the physical realm looks like standard, sustainable diet, exercise, and sleep patterns. I find it very shocking when I talk to my clients and find out that they don't have a regular sleep schedule, or they'll eat whatever they want, or they'll overeat, or they'll undereat, or they'll whatever they do that is not sustainable for their body type. Now I'll say that a lot, that the fact with each category, we need to have some common sense here. One person's ability to have a beer is another person's alcoholism. So it's important to play around with what works for our body. Next up is emotional health. Now I've already given a lot of attention to emotional health, so I'll be brief here. A balanced emotional life looks very much like what I've talked about in my video on emotional intelligence, which is to be able to name, feel, and express our emotions. So a deficient emphasis in this category looks very much like just ignoring or denying that we're feeling something. For some folks it might be anger, other folks it might be guilt and shame. It really kind of depends on the person. When we deny some visceral emotional experience, notice I said visceral, we ignore the emotion, so we ignore the energy that we've created from the mind, and then we also are ignoring parts of the body. A deficient emotional life can also feel like numbness. Very oftentimes I find that people don't have the words to describe what it is they're feeling because they don't feel it. And when I ask my clients what they're feeling, what I'm asking about is words that describe bodily tension or looseness or tightness. Not necessarily emotional words, but just words that describe what the physical body feels like. Another way that you can identify a deficient emotional life is one in which you only have one emotion that you have access to. For guys, oftentimes that's anger. For women, that's oftentimes sadness. No stereotyping here, but the point is that if we have a deficient emotional life, we don't have access to the full realm of emotions that we have available to us. An excessive emotional life can very much look like chronic anger, chronic stress, or impulsivity. What's going on is actually we start out being deficient, meaning we ignore what it is that's going on in our body and not paying attention to the emotional needs that are present. And then over time, that energy builds up so much that we can't contain it anymore. An excessive emotional life can feel very out of sorts and very chaotic. Next up is mental health. Now, I find it kind of funny here that us counselors in our field, especially with insurance, counseling as a broad whole is called mental health. Now, you'll find out that what I'm talking about with mental health is much more specific. A deficient mental life looks like having no goals, no aspirations, no sense of what it is that we want. This deficiency comes in because we're not asking ourselves questions. Notice I'm constantly talking about being curious here. So a deficient mental life has no questions that propel us towards our next big project or endeavor. An excessive mental life looks like overthinking, overanalyzing, over everything. This kind of person lives in their head. Notice how this is stacking. Having a deficient or an excessive mental life directly impacts our emotional health, which directly impacts our physical health. So the excessive mental life looks like overthinking and overanalyzing. A fancy term for you here is intellectualizing. When we intellectualize, rather than physically feel our emotions, we think about them, we talk about them, we process them. But we do so from an abstract place. And it's abstract because we actually not connected with the visceral experience of that emotion. Excessive mental life can be very, very chaotic, just like an excessive emotional life. For a balanced mental life, what we're shooting for is an effective place in which we can choose to think or not think. It took me a long time to recognize that thinking is not the enemy here. Rather, it's what we do with our thinking. So, introspection, analysis, asking ourselves questions is a very fruitful endeavor, provided that we do so in moderation. The other big aspect of mental health is being able to be quiet, getting to a place where we don't have to think about anything. Now, what I've found when I'm teaching meditation to folks for the first time is they find themselves narrating what they're experiencing. So they'll be in their head saying, I'm seeing something, I'm feeling something, I'm hearing something. That narration is part of that addiction of overthinking. So a balanced mental life is creating that space that we can actually abide in peace. Next up is interpersonal health. For the deficient focus in this area, what you find is someone who has withdrawn from people. They're either too shy or they flat out don't like people and can't get along with them. Whatever the case may be, what they're developing is independence. Now, I know that independence is oftentimes seen as a positive, especially in this country. But the way I view independence is coming to a place where you believe that no one else can help you or should help you. A deficient interpersonal life means that you do not get the support that you need. Very oftentimes, this leads to resentment and anger towards others. Rather than asking for the help that you need, you stay locked within yourself. The excessive interpersonal person is, of course, just the opposite. They spend too much time with other people. This person forms dependence. So one person forms independence and keeps themselves away from others. The excessive interpersonal person stays around people to the point of believing that it's their job to give them what they're not giving themselves: approval, attention, admiration. What happens is the dependent person is not teaching themselves how to self-soothe and self-actualize their own wants and needs. So notice the continuum of the deficient and the excessive person. Too much independence or dependence leads to an imbalance. What we're shooting for is once again that middle ground, which is interdependence. In interdependence, we actualize what it is that we can on our own. There are many things that we can do on our own, provided that we have the health and the skills to do so. But in any given moment, depending on our age, again, those skills, whatever it means, or whatever it is, we bump up against something that we need help with. It could be something as simple as pumping gas or figuring out how to get through a depressive episode. In interdependence, we do what we can and then we ask for help. Now, it's not a first and then second thing. This is an interplay of working with people to help you towards your own growth. Finally, we have spiritual health. With spiritual health, we can see an overarching view of how we connect all of the other pillars. Now, a deficient spiritual life looks like having no sense of direction and purpose in our life. More specifically, we may not have a sufficient strong moral compass that gives us a meaning in our lives and direction and purpose. Also, with the deficiently spiritual person, they don't have a connection with a greater whole. Now, let's back up to the interpersonal. Let's say they're part of a sports team. They are connected to something bigger. They're part of a team. But if that group work doesn't lead to expressing peace and love and connection with others on a scale that brings that into your life on a regular basis outside of that sports event, then it's not a spiritual practice. So notice then, the deficient spiritual person does not have any dots connected from point to point. The excessively spiritual person might actually come across as exceptionally rigid. Now, this is where religion oftentimes can get in trouble. If you strip away the political aspects of religion, they're all shooting for the same thing: connection, harmony, and peace. The excessively spiritual person, though, does not see those connections and believes their view is the only right view. What happens is that spirituality, that form of it actually, keeps you from connecting with those other aspects of yourself that can lead to more health. For example, if you'll look up the history of the Buddha, at one time before he became enlightened, he practiced self-mortification, which means physical self-abuse and denial. He eventually recognized that that didn't work for him. It was not his path. So the excessive spiritual person can actually practice denial of one of these big main pillars and thus hurt their progress and growth. The balanced spiritual person finds a place in which they can develop a connection with the impersonal. Now, I've talked about that before, but what that means is getting to a place in which you don't have to be fueled by your own personal wants and needs. Now, this gets a little tricky here. There's something called spiritual bypass. In spiritual bypass, what you're doing is using spiritual techniques to deny and ignore psychological issues that you need to be dealing with. The spiritually balanced person has found a way to broaden that space within themselves, specifically to take a break from the personal. Now, ironically, like I've said, the personal is going to get you to this place of wanting to work on the spiritual. But it's the practice itself that can help you set that aside so that you can abide in a peace that is not conditioned upon any external thing. So in summary, I want to point out a couple of things. Back when I first started teaching this to my clients, I used to include creativity as a pillar. What I've learned over time is that creativity is imbued in each one of those 5 pillars. We bring our own personal nuanced flavor to each segment. Whatever it is that we like to do physically for exercise, for what it is that we like to eat, emotionally what causes us to feel pleasure, what causes us to feel pain, the mental which stimulates us or leads us to really introspect into what it is that we want and need, interpersonally with the kind of friends that we like to hang out with, how we hang out with our coworkers, etc. And finally the spiritual, what particular practices that we are drawn to are all part of that creative continuum. When we're creative, we allow our personal nuanced flavor to inform our decisions, but we are not wedded to them. Part of all of this also is a sense of humor and kindness, which means this life is a big heuristic. It's a big trial and error. We need to go into any endeavor with open-mindedness, knowing that we may or may not get what we're shooting for. And if we don't, we keep trying. We keep working towards that next right feeling that we're shooting for. Practice these, and you'll find yourself moving from a place of survival to thriving. Take care.